The evening air hung heavy with the scent of rain, a prelude to the storm brewing in both the skies and their lives. Mark Reynolds, a private investigator with a knack for uncovering the truth, met Cassandra Pierce, a wealthy heiress with an aura of vulnerability, in the dimly lit office that doubled as his second home. She had walked in weeks ago, desperate for answers about her husband's clandestine activities. What began as routine surveillance morphed into something far more personal. Nights of shared confidences and whispered secrets over late-night calls blurred professional boundaries. Cassandra's charm and fragility drew Mark in like a moth to a flame. He rationalized his actions, convincing himself it was more than mere infatuation. Yet, a part of him knew it was a mistake. Cassandra's husband, Victor Pierce, was every bit as ruthless as Mark had uncovered. His affairs weren't limited to women but extended to dangerous business dealings that hinted at a web of corruption and power. Mark's report was ready, but he hesitated to hand it over. Cassandra had confided that she wanted freedom, not just from the marriage but from the shadow her husband cast over her life. The investigator, now entwined in her desires, found himself agreeing. The affair grew reckless. They met in secluded motels, exchanged longing glances in public places, and spoke in hushed tones over encrypted messages. But shadows lurk where passions burn brightly. Someone was watching. It happened on a Monday evening. Mark was called to an abandoned warehouse by an anonymous tip, a place he suspected Victor used for his illicit dealings. When he arrived, the air was thick with the metallic scent of blood. There lay Victor, sprawled across the floor, his lifeless eyes staring at the cracked ceiling. Mark froze. His first instinct was to call Cassandra, but
before I continue, my friends, I kindly ask you to subscribe to my channel. It only takes a second for you, but it's a huge boost of motivation for me to keep creating videos. I'd also greatly appreciate your comments. Thank you for your support. Now, let's get back to the story.
Detective Evelyn Carter, a woman known for her sharp mind, leaned across the table. "We have your fingerprints on the murder weapon," she said. "Care to explain why you were at the scene?" Mark's protests fell on deaf ears. The evidence stacked against him was damning. Texts exchanged with Cassandra hinting at violence, records of a heated argument between Mark and Victor days before the murder, and a mysterious deposit into Mark's bank account. Desperation clawed at him. He begged to see Cassandra, convinced she could clear his name. When she finally appeared, her eyes were filled with tears, but something in her demeanor was off. "Mark," she whispered, "I never thought it would come to this." The realization hit him like a freight train. Cassandra had used him. Whether she had killed Victor herself or set him up, she had orchestrated the events masterfully. The vulnerability that had ensnared him was nothing more than a calculated act. In the end, Cassandra disappeared, vanishing like smoke in the wind. Mark faced trial, convicted not only by the evidence but by his own betrayal of judgment. From behind bars, he often thought of her, a ghost haunting his memories. The passion that once consumed him had left nothing but ashes, and a life destroyed. Months passed, and Mark sat in his prison cell, replaying every moment he had shared with Cassandra. The court's conviction had been swift, driven by the mountain of evidence against him and his inability to provide a solid alibi. Mark's pleas of innocence, though fervent, were drowned by the damning details that Cassandra had carefully orchestrated. But even in prison, Mark's instincts as an investigator couldn't rest. Something gnawed at him, the pieces didn't fully fit. Cassandra may have framed him, but the precision of her moves hinted at help from someone who knew the system intimately. Powerful ally, perhaps. Victor's corrupt dealings came to mind. If Cassandra wasn't acting alone, who else was pulling the strings? One night, as the rain drummed against the high prison windows, Mark received an unexpected visitor. His former assistant, Rachel Ward, stood on the other side of the glass partition. She had always been loyal, her sharp mind a cornerstone of Mark's investigations. Seeing her now, he felt a flicker of hope. "I've been digging," Rachel said without preamble. "Something doesn't add up about Cassandra's disappearance." Mark leaned closer, listening intently as Rachel outlined her findings. She had traced Cassandra's steps after Victor's murder and found faint traces of a second life. Hidden bank accounts in offshore locations, a connection to a shadowy fixer known for fabricating evidence, and whispers of a larger conspiracy. Victor wasn't just running illegal schemes. He was part of an underground network tied to influential figures. His death had sent shockwaves through that world, and Cassandra had played a dangerous game to escape it. "Why come to me?" Mark asked, his voice tinged with both gratitude and suspicion. "Because you're the only one who knows how she operates," Rachel replied. "And because I owe you. This doesn't sit right with me, Mark. If we're going to clear your name, we need to follow the money." Their plan was delicate. Rachel worked tirelessly on the outside, tracing leads, bribing informants, and piecing together a web of deceit that stretched far beyond Cassandra. Meanwhile, Mark, ever resourceful, used his time in prison to connect with other inmates who had ties to Victor's operations. A name kept surfacing: Gabriel Stone, a man rumored to be the enforcer behind Victor's empire. Rachel tracked Stone to a remote hideout on the outskirts of the city. Confronting him wasn't easy, but Rachel's sharp wit and a bluff about leaked evidence forced his hand. "Cassandra didn't kill Victor," he growled under pressure. "She made me do it, said it was her only way out. She'd pay handsomely, and she did." Mark's suspicions solidified. Cassandra had manipulated them all, but her actions weren't just about freedom. They were about seizing power. With Victor gone, she could inherit his empire, cut ties with the underground network, and vanish with its wealth. But now Mark had the leverage he needed. Rachel turned Stone's confession over to a journalist with a reputation for exposing corruption. Within days, the story exploded, implicating Cassandra and dragging her into the spotlight. The offshore accounts, the fixer's involvement, and Stone's admission painted a picture of cold, calculated betrayal. For Mark, vindication came swiftly. The new evidence forced the courts to reopen his case, and the charges were dropped. But freedom felt hollow. His career was in tatters, his reputation scarred, and his trust in people shattered. Cassandra's downfall came months later when she was arrested in Paris under a false identity. Her glamorous life unraveled before the public eye, a stunning reminder of how far she had fallen. Yet, even as she was extradited, her defiant smirk lingered in Mark's mind, a ghostly reminder of the woman who had brought him to ruin. As he walked out of prison, the first taste of fresh air hitting his lungs, Mark resolved one thing. He would rebuild, but this time he would do it with walls around his heart. Trust was a dangerous luxury he could no longer afford. Mark stood at the gates of the prison, the chill of freedom cutting through him as he took his first step outside. The world had moved on without him, but he wasn't sure if he could move on from the betrayal that had consumed his life. Rachel was waiting in her car nearby, her presence a reminder that he wasn't entirely alone. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked as he slid into the passenger seat. "I have no choice," Mark replied, his voice gruff but steady. "If I don't face it, she wins." The media storm surrounding Cassandra's arrest was relentless. Every news outlet detailed her rise and fall, painting her as a femme fatale whose allure had ensnared even the most cautious. Mark's exoneration earned a brief mention in the narrative, but the damage to his reputation lingered. Over the next few weeks, Mark worked quietly, rebuilding his life one brick at a time. Rachel helped him set up a modest new office, far from the glitzy streets where he had once operated. His clients now were small-time cases: missing persons, infidelities, petty theft. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. Still, Cassandra loomed in the back of his mind like an unshakable shadow. Her extradition had led to a trial, but the process was slow. Powerful figures she had crossed or manipulated were still too entrenched to allow her secrets to surface. Rumors swirled that she had cut a deal, offering information in exchange for leniency. Then, one day, a letter arrived at Mark's office. The envelope was unmarked, its contents written in a hand he recognized instantly. Cassandra's words were elegant and precise, dripping with a mix of regret and venom. "Mark, you were always more than I expected, and for that, I owe you an explanation." Victor was a monster, yes, but I didn't kill him because I feared him. I killed him because he was in my way. You were never supposed to get caught up in this, but you made it easy. You let your heart lead you when your head should have prevailed. Asterisk asterisk, I won't apologize for surviving. This world chews up anyone who doesn't fight for their place. I fought and I won, even if it cost me everything. But know this, I never wanted to hurt you. You were the only person who saw me as more than a pawn or a prize. For a moment, I almost believed I could be that person. Asterisk almost. Asterisk, if you hate me, I understand. But a part of me hopes you'll remember what we had before it all unraveled. Take care, Mark. You deserved better than me. Asterisk C. Mark stared at the letter for a long time, his emotions a whirlwind of anger, sorrow, and something he couldn't quite name. He folded the paper carefully and locked it away in his desk. It was the last piece of her he would allow to linger. Months turned into years. Cassandra was sentenced to life without parole, her empire dismantled by the very people she once manipulated. Mark continued his work, slowly earning back the trust of his community and regaining his sense of purpose. Rachel became a partner in his agency, her sharp intellect a vital counterbalance to his experience. Late one night, as he sat in his office, the hum of the city outside, Mark allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Cassandra had nearly destroyed him, but she had also forced him to confront his own vulnerabilities. He wasn't the same man who had fallen for her lies, and he never would be again. Some scars, he realized, weren't meant to fade. They were there to remind you of the battles you survived. And Mark Reynolds was a survivor. The years rolled on, and Mark Reynolds built a quiet, steady life out of the wreckage Cassandra had left behind. He kept his head low, solving cases for people who couldn't afford high-priced lawyers or fancy investigators. It was fulfilling in a way his old life had never been. Still, there was a part of him, buried deep, that longed for resolution. Not just to the scars Cassandra had left, but to the questions she had never answered. One winter evening, as snow blanketed the city, Rachel burst into Mark's office with a file clutched in her hands. Her face was pale, her usual calm replaced with urgency. "You're not going to believe this," she said, tossing the file onto his desk. Mark opened it, his brow furrowing as he scanned the contents. Inside were grainy surveillance photos of a woman stepping out of a black car in Istanbul. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses, but Mark recognized her instantly. "Cassandra," he murmured. Rachel nodded. "She escaped 2 months ago during a prison transfer. This photo was taken last week. Interpol thinks she's rebuilding her network overseas." Mark's jaw tightened. Cassandra wasn't just a ghost from his past. She was a specter rising again, threatening to undo the fragile peace he had fought to achieve. For years, he had tried to bury her memory, but now she was forcing her way back into his life. "What are you thinking?" Rachel asked, watching him carefully. "I'm thinking I can't let her keep running," Mark said, standing abruptly. "She's hurt too many people, and if she's rebuilding, she'll do it all over again." Rachel crossed her arms. "You realize this isn't just another case. This is personal." Mark met her gaze, his voice firm. "It's always been personal." The next few weeks were a blur of planning. Rachel used her connections to pull strings, securing Mark a fake identity and a ticket to Istanbul. Mark dusted off his old skills, diving into the murky underworld where Cassandra had always thrived. He knew it was a long shot, but he couldn't ignore the pull of unfinished business. In Istanbul, the city's vibrant chaos masked the danger lurking in its shadows. Mark followed whispers and rumors, trailing Cassandra's associates through bustling markets and hidden alleys. Each lead brought him closer, but the closer he got, the more the weight of their history pressed on him. He wasn't sure if he wanted to catch her or simply understand why she had chosen this path. It was in an opulent nightclub on the Bosphorus that Mark finally found her. Cassandra was seated in a private booth, laughing with a group of men who exuded wealth and menace. She looked radiant, as though the years and her crimes hadn't touched her. But when her eyes met Mark's from across the room, her smile faltered. She dismissed her entourage with a wave and motioned for him to join her. Against every instinct, Mark approached, his heart pounding. "You came," she said, her voice low and smooth. "I always knew you would." Mark sat across from her, his gaze steady. "You didn't leave me much of a choice." For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Cassandra leaned in, her expression softening. "You could have stayed away, Mark. Why didn't you?" "Because I need answers," he replied. "Why? Why everything? The lies, the setup, Victor, us." Cassandra sighed, her mask of confidence slipping. "I didn't lie about everything. What we had, it was real. But Victor's world didn't allow for weakness. You were my way out, Mark. And when you became a liability, I did what I had to do." Her words cut deeper than he expected, but Mark held his composure. "And now? What are you doing here? Starting over?" Cassandra's eyes sparkled with something between defiance and regret. "Surviving, as always. You should try it sometime." Mark reached into his coat, pulling out a recording device and placing it on the table. "Turn yourself in, Cassandra. It doesn't have to end like this." She laughed softly, a sound both bitter and amused. "You still don't understand, do you? It's already over. The minute you walked in here, you became a part of this again." Before Mark could respond, chaos erupted. A group of armed men stormed the club, guns drawn. Cassandra's calm demeanor vanished as she sprang to her feet. "You led them to me," she hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. Mark realized too late that they had been followed. The men weren't law enforcement. They were from Victor's old network, seeking revenge for his death. Cassandra grabbed Mark's arm, pulling him into the chaos as gunfire erupted. They fled through the back alleys of Istanbul, their shared history colliding with their present danger. When they finally stopped, breathless and cornered, Cassandra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "This is where we say goodbye," she said, stepping back. "You don't have to run," Mark pleaded. "We can fix this." Cassandra smiled, a sad, fleeting thing. "Some things can't be fixed, Mark." And then she was gone, disappearing into the labyrinth of the city. Mark stood there, the weight of her absence crushing him once again. He returned to his quiet life, knowing he had come close but would never truly catch her. Cassandra wasn't just a woman. She was a storm, unpredictable and unstoppable. And Mark Reynolds, for better or worse, was forever caught in her wake. Months passed after Istanbul, yet the memory of that chaotic night lingered in Mark's mind. His encounter with Cassandra had left him in a familiar limbo, a blend of closure and unresolved longing. She was a phantom, a force of nature he could neither tame nor forget. He returned to his modest life with Rachel, solving the cases that walked through their door, but the spark that once fueled him felt dimmed. One evening, while Mark was locking up the office, Rachel's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. She frowned as she read it, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Mark," she said cautiously, "you need to see this." The message was a single line of text accompanied by an attachment. Asterisk, "You're in over your head. Let me help you one last time." Asterisk, the attachment contained coordinates, deep in the jungles of South America, and a name, Gabriel Stone. Mark's blood ran cold. Stone was the enforcer Cassandra had used to kill Victor, a man he thought would never resurface after confessing to Rachel. The location was remote, far from any semblance of law or civilization. "Are you really considering this?" Rachel asked. Mark hesitated but nodded. "If she's reaching out, it's for a reason. And if Stone's involved, it might be bigger than just her." Rachel sighed. "I'll start looking into flights. But you owe me dinner when this is over." The journey to South America was grueling. Thick, humid air clung to Mark as he trekked into the dense jungle with a local guide. The coordinates led to a decaying villa hidden among the trees, its walls covered in creeping vines. The air was eerily still, save for the occasional rustle of wildlife. Inside, Mark found Gabriel Stone sitting at a table, nursing a drink. The man looked older, wearier, but his eyes still held the cold precision of someone who had seen and caused too much violence. "You've got guts showing up here," Stone growled, motioning for Mark to sit. But I guess that's why she trusts you. Where is she? Mark asked, his voice edged with frustration. Stone smirked, always straight to the point. She's nearby, but she wanted me to talk to you first. Mark's patience was wearing thin. Why? Because things are worse than you think, Stone replied. Victor wasn't just a criminal, he was part of a global syndicate. When Cassandra killed him, she didn't just inherit his enemies. She inherited his secrets. And now the syndicate wants her dead. Or worse. Mark's stomach twisted. Why reach out to me? She's always been good at saving herself. Stone chuckled darkly. Because she's running out of moves. The syndicate's closing in. And she knows you're the only person who might still care enough to help her. Mark's mind raced. Part of him wanted to walk away, to leave Cassandra to her fate. But he couldn't ignore the nagging sense of duty, or the faint ember of feelings he still carried for her. Take me to her, Mark said finally. Stone led him deeper into the jungle, to a hidden clearing where a small, weathered cabin stood. Cassandra was inside, pacing like a caged animal. When she saw Mark, her expression shifted from relief to guarded apprehension. You came, she said softly. You didn't leave me much of a choice, Mark replied, his tone sharp. Cassandra sighed, gesturing for him to sit. I didn't call you here to manipulate you. I need your help. Why should I believe you? Mark countered. Every time I've trusted you, it's ended in disaster. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, Mark saw something he rarely associated with Cassandra. Vulnerability. Because this time, I'm out of options. She explained the situation in painstaking detail. The syndicate had discovered the extent of Victor's betrayal, including a ledger Cassandra had stolen, a document capable of exposing their entire operation. She had intended to use it as leverage, but now it was a death sentence. I can't keep running, she admitted. And if they get that ledger, they'll come for everyone who's touched it, including you. Mark felt a chill run through him. Cassandra's actions had dragged him back into the crossfire, whether he liked it or not. What's the plan? He asked grimly. She hesitated, then handed him a USB drive. The ledger's on this. If we release it to the right people, journalists, whistleblowers, we can take them down. But we'll need to work together. Mark nodded reluctantly. I'll help, but this doesn't mean I forgive you. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Cassandra said quietly. Just trust me one last time. Over the next few days, they worked side by side, devising a plan to transmit the ledger safely while evading the syndicate. The tension between them was palpable, their shared history a constant undercurrent. Despite everything, Mark found himself drawn to her resilience, her brilliance, and the flickers of humanity she rarely let show. The operation culminated in a harrowing chase through the jungle, with syndicate operatives hot on their heels. Mark and Cassandra narrowly escaped, transmitting the ledger moments before their safe house was compromised. The fallout was immediate: arrests, headlines, and chaos across the syndicate's ranks. As they parted ways at a remote airstrip, Cassandra turned to Mark. This is it, isn't it? She asked. It has to be, Mark replied, his voice heavy with finality. You need to disappear for good this time. Cassandra nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. Thank you, Mark, for everything. And then she was gone, vanishing into the shadows once more. Mark watched her plane disappear into the horizon, knowing it was the last time he would ever see her. When he returned home, Rachel was waiting, her expression a mix of relief and exasperation. Did you get closure? She asked. Mark thought for a long moment before answering. No, but maybe some things aren't meant to be closed. And with that, he stepped back into his life, leaving the storm of Cassandra Pierce behind him. Forever. In the months that followed Cassandra's final disappearance, Mark Reynolds tried to rebuild the walls around his life. He took on new cases, closed old ones, and found solace in the routine of his work. But no matter how much distance he put between himself and the events in the jungle, Cassandra's shadow lingered. A whisper in the corners of his mind, a question left unanswered. The fallout from the ledger's release was monumental. News reports detailed the unraveling of the syndicate, exposing a vast network of corruption, money laundering, and violence. High-ranking officials, CEOs, and criminals alike were arrested, their secrets dragged into the light. For Mark, it was a bittersweet victory. The world was a little safer, but Cassandra had vanished into it, leaving him to carry the weight of their history alone. One evening, months after her departure, Mark sat alone in his office. Rachel had gone home for the night, and the city outside buzzed with life. He stared at the stack of files on his desk, but his mind was elsewhere. On impulse, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out the letter Cassandra had sent him after her trial. The paper was worn from the number of times he had unfolded it, but the words still stung as if he were reading them for the first time. Asterisk, you were the only person who saw me as more than a pawn or a prize. Asterisk, he leaned back in his chair, letting out a heavy sigh. Was it true? Had he been the only one to see her for who she was? Or had he been blind to the depths of her manipulations, as everyone else had warned him? He would never know, and perhaps that was the point. Cassandra was a paradox, a puzzle he could never solve. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He glanced at the clock. It was late for a client. Cautiously, he crossed the room and opened the door. A courier stood there, holding a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. Mark Reynolds? The courier asked. Mark nodded, taking the package. Before he could ask who had sent it, the courier was already walking away. Back at his desk, he unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a single item, a photograph. It was old, slightly creased at the edges. It showed a younger Cassandra standing in a sunlit garden, smiling. She looked carefree in a way Mark had never seen. On the back of the photo, a message was scrawled in her unmistakable handwriting. Asterisk, for what it's worth. You were my way out too. Asterisk. Mark stared at the photo for a long time, his chest tight with emotion. It was a goodbye, he realized, not just from Cassandra, but from the part of her that had dared to hope for a different life. She was telling him, in her own way, that he had mattered, that despite all the lies, betrayals, and chaos, there had been something real between them. For the first time in years, Mark felt a sense of peace. He carefully placed the photo in his drawer, locking it away with the letter. Then he stood, turned off the lights, and walked out of the office. As he stepped into the cool night air, he looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Cassandra Pierce was still running, still surviving. And though he knew their paths would never cross again, he also knew that he could finally let her go. Some stories didn't need an ending. They simply faded into the horizon, leaving behind echoes of what could have been. For Mark, it was enough. It had to be.